Okay. This is because it's fun. Like Kevin, what are you doing? I gotta get coffee.
And then just that's why
What is
representation of Welsh culture in my foreign
Oh,
films.
this
Right now, in general.
in the
Or
game?
cinema, I still see everything. It's umbrella.
I saw
loads of
traffic.
films and TV shows.
Off school, there's something we can't value talking to
I know, yeah. I'm gonna go film my videos. Well, I'm gonna go to Jordan, stay on campus for an hour before shows it. And then I'm gonna make some more projects. And in that hour, I'm gonna try because I've got all my sources ready. So I'm gonna try and write at least half of the team. And then when I'm from my coffee house, I'm gonna try and do the storyboard. And then if I have to see
later,
I'm gonna try and
it is today that my mental week.
I can't.
I think I put one. I'm not sure.
It is?
I think so. Don't sound so sure about that.
What time?
Number in power training asking
That's very specific.
Well, that was the only
Welcome to
one
the
that was allowing
Power
me to
Cooking
do.
Challenge.
I'm very popular.
I'm sure you are.
People pitch up.
Two.
She'd been already. I don't know why the attitude.
Nah,
Like,
keep it in the
first one in.
I'll do the
Yeah, it was, isn't it? Rip the band-aid off.
There is one, is it?
I was not here.
Well, I'll look forward to it. See you later.
Oh, look at this.
I'm too young to do
So
it.
good. Storyboard. No.
What are you eating?
Oh my god.
Oh, wait, is this a seal medal?
Yeah.
But it was always like,
So you didn't bring enough for everyone else?
I barely got remember
Oh.
to bring my own.
Yeah.
You wanna go last?
You haven't ate now.
You can't aim down.
Oh, you can only
You can't aim in this game.
I'm making sandwiches and bringing them now.
No, that's
I'm making sandwiches and bringing them to work now because I refuse to keep for a million years to get a sausage roll and the ones in the other shop. They're not made. Nothing in that shop is edible.
Press enter. Press escape.
Yeah.
Let's escape again. Go quick game.
Right, okay.
Or the knee deep in there. I'm too young to die.
Yeah.
Like baby mode.
Beginners.
That's all colour.
The rest
Whole
of it,
film.
the rest of it you see coming
I just gotta, I'm reading something on The Guardian, right, and it's kind of pertinent to games. In the 2000 Olympics, Paralympics, Spain won the basketball medal in the Paralympics for people with learning impairments, but none of their team had learning. That's it. I didn't even know this story. This is amazing.
You'd be surprised. Para sports has come a long way. There are so many pets, so many.
Intellectual impairment or learning difficulties. They won the gold medal. 10 of the 12 of the team had nothing. They were pretend to. Oh my god. I love it. That's amazing. That is superb. That's something that EA would let you do. You know, if you paid enough money.
Yeah.
So that could never happen now. There are like too many. Like when I was like, it's like you'd have like,
Do you like you have to have like certificates and
yeah,
stuff,
like
right? Yeah.
assessments, like to make sure that like
Behind that big
are you disabled enough to be in this category?
Go, no.
It's not.
Go further into the room.
Who was
This room.
studied
Guess it.
Behind that big.
That's probably the reason why, right? That is probably the reason why they have to do that.
And it's even worse for like people with learning difficulties at Sweden as well, because there's like should they be allowed in the Paralympics?
You'll go
They
on
have to like submit like this much
when you
paperwork.
did
And like a risk assessment is going to be pretty intense, right? Yeah. Okay, so in hand with colonialism always goes utopianism. The idea that building any kind of new world can be a perfection on what we already have. So most political positions are utopian. We are in a horrendous mess as a country at the moment, partially because the new Prime Minister is a utopian. The firmly held conviction of our new Prime Minister was that if you allow rich people to pay less tax, you will create some kind of utopian society where everyone will become richer. The only problem with that is that it's complete and total bollocks of the highest order, and has been tried in the past and didn't work. And the only conclusion you can draw is that our new Prime Minister is horrendously unqualified to be Prime Minister of this country. Anyway, that utopian idea, you can't pin that on Liz Truss. That's everywhere. Just about every political position is a utopian position. You know, people always have a big thing like, socialism and capitalism, they're different things. Actually, they're two sides of exactly the same coin. They're both aiming for the same thing. You know, you have this wonderful utopian world based on just one set of ideals or another set of ideals. There's no real difference in the root of where these things came about. They have the same aim, they just have a different way of getting to that aim. And in fact, they're just the inverse of one another, which tells you that the problem isn't necessarily those positions, it's what they're trying to change in the first place is the big problem. All video games, according to Alex Galloway, are utopian projects. They create worlds in which certain laws are simulated and others are not. We overemphasize particular things, we underemphasize other stuff. We try to create a utopian sort of experience and world. And even in something which can be quite dark, like modern warfare, the purpose of everything you're trying to do in modern warfare is to defeat somebody in order to make, I guess, the world a better place. You know, get rid of this horrible lot and everything will be fine. History of warfare tells us that's not the case, but it's still a motivating factor. And so discourses in virtual worlds are very utopian, despite the fact that a lot of the virtual worlds we play in are actually quite dystopian worlds. You know, a lot of the things that we do are quite, take Dead Space for example, that's a very dystopian environment, right? And kind of cool because of it. But your purpose in Dead Space is to make that dystopia not dystopian anymore, it's to make it better, right? To stop it being so damn freaky, because it is freaky. And we know about discourse, right? Because after 3 years of your degree, you know all about discourse, and you know about Stuart Hall, and you know about all this good stuff, right? And when you make statements about something within a particular discourse, it makes it possible to construct the topic in a certain way. It also limits the other ways in which the topic can be constructed. Hall's classic formulation of discourse is incredibly important. When we have discourses about a particular topic, it means we can talk about them in one way, and we can't talk about them in the other way. This really is why Gamergate is so problematic. Not just for games, but also for society itself. Because what Gamergate told us in 2014 was this: there were particular ways to talk about video games, and if you step outside, you get burned. That was really the root of what was going on here. So if you, perhaps not focusing on the Zoe Quinn, if you're missing some context, don't worry, Gamergate will be covered in extensive detail later on in the module. But if you look in particular at the experience of women game designers and feminist critics of video games, the criticism of those positions is not necessarily a criticism of being a feminist necessarily. It is that video games don't encompass that thing. It shouldn't be in the discourse in the first place. You are outside of what we are doing here. And therefore, video game discourse itself limits the way we can talk about games and can't talk about them. And if you bring in a feminist critique of video games, as someone like Anita Sarkeesian does, she just gets absolutely hammered. And that's not stopped, by the way. She's still getting absolutely hammered today. You know, or just go onto a YouTube channel and look at the comments. You know, all the time. So, if we make a world from an ideological position, we are creating the conditions for discourse within that world and how we talk about the game itself. And we are also, at the same time as doing that, creating what can't be said about it. We are excluding other positions from it. And if video games generally are colonialist, imperialistic, and usually hand in hand with colonialism, we'd say utopian, and another important ideological position, patriarchal, because the patriarchy and colonialism, best buddies, then video games as discursive statements about the world are saying some things, and they are they're not just not saying other things, they're not even allowing the space for other things to be said. If we follow Hall on discourse, the discursive creation of games creates particular conditions to talk about not just that world, but the world, all our worlds, in a particular way. And that's why I'm always very keen to say virtual worlds, yeah, they exist, but they're not separate from everything else. We are all part of one, they are part of our world. We don't separate out. That's why I think the magic circle is a really problematic idea, because it takes them out of the context. Actually, when we're playing games, we're in them. We don't think that, like, here's a different world that I exist in. It is all subjectively the same thing to us. And therefore, the discourses and the ideologies that are in that particular environment are resonant across experience. They're not discrete. And so Hall's idea here about how video games, and how creating virtual worlds and new worlds, if we link it back to what are the dominant discourses there, and Hall's idea here, we can see a sort of chain of thinking emerging now, that if the video game industry is about creating new worlds, and the dominant ideologies of those new worlds are problematic, colonialism, patriarchy, utopianism, late capitalism, we are creating conditions by which we can talk about our experience and our world in general, and not talk about it in other ways. And again, I'll take it back to the Gamergate example. Why do gamers at that time, it's not all by any means, but why do people have such a problem? Because it's people trying to talk about experience of this particular aspect of life in a way that is completely contrary to how they understand it. How do they understand it? By how they've played. What they've played and how it's being played. And you get a bunch of women coming along and saying, that's problematic, and you're like, that kicked off a bit quick, and continues to kick off in a big way. So, what is discourse in this sense? A way of organising knowledge and understanding so that certain ideas will always appear true. If games are discursive, spoiler, they are, because just by the very procedural aspects of them, we interact, we control, we have embodiment in them, they are persistent over time. Discourse constructs a certain set of beliefs that are held in common by a number of people. It's no surprise that the ideologies, both in terms of creation of and playing of games, can be really, really problematic in that sense. And when it is... there was a question to go on this slide, but it was in my head, and I thought I'd keep it in my head. When a discourse becomes, when it breaks through, if you like, they're taken as granted as the truth. People make sense of the world through these discourses, they see the world through them, and everyone operates through discourse. When a discourse becomes held as a common sense view of the world, there is a specific word that we use to describe that. Can anyone tell me what that word is? It is associated with the great Italian sociologist and political theorist Antonio Gramsci.
Hegemonic.
Hegemony.
You got there. It's too early in the morning to be doing this stuff. Hegemonic, indeed. Hegemony. I don't know if that's the right way of saying it. That's just the way I say it, hegemony. It could be different. But it's always spelt the same, and, this isn't an oral exam at the end of the day. You know, as long as you spell it right, I don't care. Yeah, when discourses become common sense, they become hegemonic. Power is expressed through these ideologies. Again, when you're playing these games, think about the power relationship here. Think about the power relationship of being asked to go and do this mission. What is it telling you about how power is expressed? Ideology is always legitimized through discourses, are basically things I was talking about in year one. And there is Mr. Gramsci himself and his idea of hegemony. Now, the idea that ideology is transmitted through the mass media comes through the Frankfurt School, Adorno and Horkheimer. And those in power are able to diffuse those ideologies. This then becomes hegemonic, and the ideologies of common elites become common sense. There is no alternative. We should be familiar with all of this at this point. Discourse and ideology are related but distinct to one another. Ideology is linked to a specific relation of power relations, but discourse is more diffuse. And this idea comes from Michel Foucault. Power and knowledge are always linked together. Both are used in societal control, and power always controls and defines knowledge. Right, now, rattle through all of that, because the important point is really at the end here. Who defines power, not just in video games, but in virtual worlds? Where does power reside? We all play games. Who's got the power relationship in the game? Go on, Morgan.
Factions,
What do you mean by that?
the groups in the game, like organisations. I'm talking, if I want to talk more modern, the Arasaka in Cyberpunk 2077. They have power, they're a tech company. They're a big capitalist company. They have power over technology in Night City.
Okay. Interesting. I'm going to totally disagree with you.
Go on.
Does anyone? I'll take the game, but go on, John.
We'd like to think it's ourselves, but it's not the creators of the game, really.
I couldn't have put it better myself. So your game, yeah, that in the subjective experience of playing the game, sure, that faction in the game has power, right? There's a power in, you know, asymmetry between your position as a player and that group, and it's almost like an archetypal game type that, you know, as I said, I'm playing Far Cry 6 now. I'm starting out with this ragtag bunch of guerrillas on the side of a mountain, right? But by the end of the game, in about 25 hours' time, we'll rule the island. You know, and this is this is a very familiar sort of game trope. But let's go up one level of abstraction here. We have interactivity, we have presence, we do things in the game. This tends to give a skewed impression of power, because unlike in other media, we are actively involved in the game. We feel like our power relationship with the text is more powerful than it actually is, because we are an agent rather than just somebody who is receiving information. But the truth told is we are only doing things that the designer allows us to do. Even in something incredibly expansive like The Sims, you have a finite number of actions that you are allowed to do. You can't step outside that frame. There are just some things you cannot do in total, you know. In my little Sims world, I want to make an X-rated theatre. I want to give those guys some proper entertainment, right? Won't let me do it. Why? Because, you're willing to steal off children, but you think pornography is problematic. Fuck you, EA. So, there are corners put around everything we do. And if power always controls and defines knowledge, as according to Foucault, then when we understand the power relationship that we have pretty much in every video game, and I mean, I've heard this expressed in conferences, somebody said, well, something like a platform like Roblox subverts this. I was like, no, it doesn't. It actually makes it worse. What you can do in Roblox is completely defined by the people who created that world. And not only did they, okay, so they give you scope, but I'm not going to argue with that. You've got a scope to do a lot of stuff in Roblox. Minecraft works on this principle as well. You can do quite a bit of stuff in Minecraft, and you can do some really interesting things. But don't forget that everything you can do is laid out in the parameters that those designers did. And Roblox is even more problematic because anything you do, they're likely to steal it off you and monetize in some way as well. That's even worse. So, you know, the power relationship for me in that world is really, really clear. And then you've got the whole grooming thing that goes on with it as well. And it's like, if you've got younger siblings or like relatives who use that, get them to delete it. It's not good. It really is bad. Power always controls and defines our knowledge. And if the power relationship in games is problematic, as I would argue it is, because everything that we can do in a particular virtual world is defined by those who have power, i.e. the creators of it, then knowledge itself becomes problematic. If those creators have, either deliberately or unintentionally, ideology is not always a deliberate thing, but if there is an ideological position which is communicated through the world itself and what we can do in it, and the power relationship is such, then those ideologies will become a factor in how we understand not just the world that we're acting in there, but other worlds also. And then we're always in a position where we're having to contest. So, I know somebody who contests. She's sitting at the back. Cheska. What, for you, is the most problematic aspect of being a female gamer?
It's just like, I love the game. I just want to be part of the team. I just want to be part of the team. I just do a call out, and then someone will be like, is that a female? And it's like, I just want to play the game and enjoy it. It's just so annoying.
And why are they doing it?
Because they see, you know, women as inferior, because they're taught that men are the, you know, machos.
Is that true?
I mean, that's how it seems from my position.
Let's ask ourselves a fundamental question here. And let me frame it in a really problematic way, just to make this even more uncomfortable for everyone in the room. Is the patriarchy correct? Because that's really what we're talking about here, isn't it? Let's frame it how it's supposed to be. Is the patriarchy right? So you're shaking your head, but I'm not hearing any verbal response to this.
Expand on that question.
Hmm?
Expand on that question.
Well, what I
Give me
mean by this
examples
is
of how the patriarchy can be right and wrong.
that women can't play video games.
It's obviously not true.
But, yeah.
Well,
We can't.
according to Cheska's experience, this is something held by a lot of people.
Yeah, but...
That women are inferior at particular things. Is that correct?
But it's like, as women...
You know I'm playing devil's advocate, but come on, go on Jordan, what are you going to say?
You can't like, I can't really speak on experience because I've never experienced that, because my game is not like a shared experience, but like as women, you can't
But you're
really,
a football fan.
Yeah, but you can't...
You know what I'm
But
going to say, right?
you can't like say, or like if we're going to talk about sports, you can't be like, well, women can enjoy sports, because then they quiz you about every single thing, and like to enjoy something that's like predominantly male.
That's a really good exemplification. Is the patriarchy right? No. Does it exist? Yes. That's where we should really be with that. It was a very leading question, just to try and tease that out. And I know it came from something slightly different than video games, but I think it's perfectly resonant what Jordan just said. Jordan probably knows more about football than me, right? Because I'm a fucking idiot. But if Jordan and I were to be discussing football, let's say in the pub before Swans match, some absolute bellend would come over and start talking over the top of you. and completely undermining your position. I know this because it happens. I see it all the time, right? Patriarchy might not be correct, but ideologies don't have to be correct. It's nothing correct, it's an idea. Ideas aren't right or wrong. That's why we have a multitude of them. You know, often contradictory in our own heads, but we can hold two positions at the same time, you know. Ben thinks this lecture sucks, but he still comes. For example, right? Eve's there nodding away, yeah, it does fucking suck and all.
Yeah.
So, what I want us to get our heads around here is the aspect of power. If the power relationship in video games is such that creators control the ideological content, and if that ideological content is colonialist, imperialist, utopian, patriarchal, all these other problematic aspects, it doesn't matter if those things are right. What matters is that those positions will be held by those who are playing those games. That's what the important part is. Strip the patriarchal aspect for a moment, because that is a personally resonant position. Let's take it up a level of abstraction for a second. The colonialist argument. Are video game communities ostensibly racist? Colonialism is almost exclusively a white position. If you look at the history of colonialism globally, it's usually white people killing non-white people. That's what historically has happened. Are video games racist? I mean, I'll give you an example from the second biggest selling video game in history, Grand Theft Auto 5. What happens to the black character? He commits a bunch of low-level crimes, first of all, stereotype much, until he gets so good at it that he can move to a white area. Then he's made it. He's moved out of his black area into the white area, got himself a white person's car, doing white people things, and then he's happy. Whoa. That's pretty problematic.
But isn't that commentary on, couldn't that be social commentary and not just like
I mean, Rockstar definitely would argue this is a social commentary on contemporary American society. The fact that they're making you do it is a little more problematic than that, I would say. They didn't have to write the black character in that way.
True.
You know, I'm almost sympathetic to the idea that this is a satire on American consumerism and American society. I get the joke. I just don't think it's a very good joke.
Right.
That would be my problem with it in a sense, because all you're asking people to do who might be naive to that social commentary is to do it anyway and just reenact tropes which are tired and don't resonate with, you know, the experience of black people in America, quite frankly. You know, if you wanted to do something like that, you would, you know, have something around police oppression of black people or something like that, which they don't have in that game. You know, so I think it's a well-made point, Josh. That, you know, there's obviously an attempt at satire. I just think it's a little bit
flat.
Yeah, and at the same time they're trying to satirise Italian Americans in that game, and you know, it's not like, hey Luigi, you want a meatball? They don't do it like that, you know? So it's, you know, why do it to that group but not do it to that group? I'm not quite sure. Maybe the next one will be a bit less tone deaf. I would hope so after 10 years that, you know, they've learned some lessons, because it's not like, hey, this isn't just me. You know, there's a lot of criticism like this, and I think they actually do listen to Rockstar as well, weirdly. I mean, are we all clear on what I'm trying to argue here, at least? The power relationships that we have in games, unless we're making them ourselves, which most of us do not do, you know, and the odds on me ever being able to sit down and make a AAA console game are 1,000,000,000 to 1. You know, I don't have $200 million to spend and 10 years and a team of programmers and, you know, a team of visual designers. It would be nice, you know, but you know, it's not going to happen, right? So, so you know, the power relationship is always going to be defined by others, and within that power relationship, we are going to have, if the ideological position of those who make games is problematic, then we're going to have some problematic things. Now, I sort of pulled a list down here, but as always, my timings are all over the place today, so let's pick a couple of these and we can just talk about them as a group. There's probably a few here that we've not played. Let's deal with Sims 4. What are the ideologies embedded in Sims 4?
Capitalism.
How is that exemplified?
You earn capital from your labour to buy commodities.
What do you do? What is that? A million percent correct. With you 100%. What's interesting to me about Sims is what people typically do with this. What do people typically do in The Sims with the money that they get earned?
They expand their house. They buy new furniture.
Yes. The Sims is the video game equivalent of IKEA shopping. What do people are? People blow, right? So, you know, you've got these wage slaves like me, and you earn all this money, right? And what do you do at the start of the month when you go to bed? You say, oh yeah, I really needed like a new thing to put shit on. I better go to IKEA. The Sims is basically this, right? Yeah, I've got this nice house, but I could really do with an occasional table. The fuck do you... You're not real. You're just a collection of pixels. You don't need that occasional, but of course you do need it, because, yeah.
I don't think I've ever played Sims without money cheating. I don't think I've ever done a legit like playthrough.
I don't think I've ever gone through life without money cheating. You want a resonance with everyday life? I mean, I don't want you all to think I'm cheap, but I am. I will not buy any piece of furniture or any white goods unless they're on sale. Is that money cheating? I guess it is, in a sense. I won't go to a supermarket without stealing something. That's my more direct money cheating. You know, if there's loose onions, what kind of fucking idiot? Do you think they've got microchips in them? Put them in your pockets. This is going up on YouTube afterwards. I should add it, right? You know, so. Do you know what really freaks me out? Do you know, like kids in the supermarket and like they're given something, and then the parents keep the packaging to put it through the tills?
Yeah.
Nobody fucking cares. Just throw it away. Let the kid. Okay, so the kid's got crumbs around his face from the sausage roll it's been eating. Whatever. Just say the kid's got herpes or something. It don't matter, right? You know, or idiots. Yes. Ideological content of Sims is quite straightforward. Can you shoplift in Sims?
No, you just...
You can steal stuff from other households, but you can't
can.
sell it.
You can, yeah. That's. I might have to start playing Sims. Trying to accumulate. Okay, what about... yeah, well, we may as well do it because Eve's going to just leech her video off us now, right? Red Dead Redemption 2. What is the ideological content of Red Dead Redemption 2? There are a few. I mean, quite a lot of us might not have played it, but I think we're all aware of the game, at least, because it's pretty huge. Okay. Well, I've played through, obviously. What am I asked to do? I'm asked to accumulate money. First of all, that is a very important part of the game. So there's a, if you like, a capitalist thing where I do tasks in order to accumulate wealth. So my labour effectively is going into this. I'm also at various periods asked to displace people from spaces in order for my group to take over those spaces. there's a classic colonialism at play here. Indeed, most egregiously at one point, I am asked to rescue, this is quite late in the story of the game, but I'm asked to rescue a Native American tribe from a group of, from a company that is basically trying to take their land off them. White saviorism is rampant in that. But at the pinnacle of that story, the tribe is so damaged by it that I can take all their resources anyway. It's like, holy shit. It's like, so you help the tribe out, but you get rewarded for that by taking all their stuff, including like these really important like tribal objects and things like that. So there's a huge bunch of problematic stuff in that. How do you earn kudos in the game? Hunting, wiping out nature is a really important aspect of the game itself. You are sent out to take down the biggest bear and the biggest fish and what have you, and it's a whole bunch of not great fun to do that sort of stuff. It's a bit of a grind. Embedded within that game itself, now, again, I'll give them some slack, that you could view this as a slight parody on history itself, because the history of that time is colonialism, it is white saviorism, it is rampant capitalism of that kind. That's those are established historical facts, but again, I am being asked to do those things, and it does get unproblematic. It really does. As you play through the game and you embody the character, what you are asked to do becomes less. Even if you go into it with an ideological frame of, I think this is, this is pretty awful, and historically this happened, I don't agree with this. As you go through, it becomes less and less problematic to you. It's a seductive and kind of relationship you have with the game. It genuinely is. You can accept positions which are really problematic. Think about modern warfare in that context. As you play through and you get, especially when you get better at it, that kind of thinking will not come into your head. You are ready to do this. Pac-Man. You all know Pac-Man, right? Waka, 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 waka. That's the sound Pac-Man makes. Well, that is a very realistic game sound.
Caught me off guard.
What is the ideological content of Pac-Man? What does Pac-Man do? Munch. When does Pac-Man stop munching?
When he gets killed.
When he gets killed, but in theory, Pac-Man never stops eating. You can keep on going. I mean, you have to be pretty good, but you can keep going and going and going and going. Continual consumption is the basis of Pac-Man. How do you keep going? You continue to consume. Continual consumption as a Western ideology is the reason why in the next 30, 40 years, a lot of the West is going to be underwater. Because we've continually consumed fossil fuels, continually consumed a materialistic lifestyle, and now all of a sudden the planet's getting warmer, and the ice caps are melting, and we're all going to drown. Not me, I live in Skye. That'll be right. But people who live in town, and will it be missed, town? No. And Wine Street's going to be underwater. Boo, hoo, hoo. So yeah, I joke. I'll be dead then anyway. So, but yeah, there is even ideological construct in what you are asked to do in classic single frame games like Pac-Man, for example. I mean, Call of Duty, I think, is a great example of the kind of ideologically compromised position you can be put in as a gamer. But the key thing being, it's different for you, Ben, being in the third year of a degree course where you have learned about this kind of stuff. The vast majority of people playing Modern Warfare have not done that, These questions don't occur. And therefore, I think it makes that ideological position far easier to take in. I put FIFA down because, you've already swallowed the pill if you're still playing FIFA. And Do you know how many copies FIFA sells every year?
Too many.
Far too many, yeah. I'm talking like, it's in the tens of millions every year. So it's big. The whole core of this is to look at the rules within the games. And really this is what I want you to focus on a lot in your videos. The idea that the rules within games are important ideologically. This comes from Ian Bogost. You use the word that revolutionised the field. He did. There's no question he's one of the most important games theorists that there is. Look at the argument coded within the game rather than the game itself. Look at what is the game asking you to do and what kind of argument is that proposing. So a game like Modern Warfare has an argument and is asking you to perform that argument. In this sense, the argument is far stronger because you are not being asked to agree or disagree with it. You are being placed in a position where you have to perform it, and you don't have a choice in doing that if you want to complete the game. I mean, this is actually quite elegantly put forward in some really, really controversial games, like Manhunt. Do people know what I'm talking about when I mention Manhunt, the game? Look it up. Kind of got banned and then was unbanned. Indeed, there was a Wii version of Manhunt, which is even more disturbing if you look up what the game is, because obviously with the Wii controllers and things like that, you, instead of like bludgeoning somebody to death by using a conventional controller, you were doing it with the Wii controller, which is really, really dark. I'm amazed Nintendo allowed that, because Nintendo don't do things like that usually, so what happened there, I don't know. If you look at something like Manhunt, and there's a number of other problematic, like really violent games like that, there's a subvertive element to what's going on here, because the argument of the game is so grotesque that they are challenging you as a player to say, like, should I do this? You know, should I take responsibility for it? It's like you were saying, Ben, with shooting kids. It's a deliberate thing, but there's an attempt being made for you to address this kind of logic. Most people don't. Still, even when presented with that, you know, you can distance yourself enough to do these things. So what Ian Bogost worked out was to get us to concentrate on that argumentative frame. What is this game's argument and how are we enacting it? If you think about it in that way, we can get a level of abstraction from what we do in order to understand what is being asked of us. And the authorship of the rules of behaviour in games is absolutely critical according to Bogost. So who writes the rules? Why are they written? What commercial and institutional interests are involved? What are the politics of such rules? Those are the questions that Bogost says we should ask about any game we play. Always ask those questions. Who is writing them? Why are they doing it? How are they making money out of it? And what are the politics of what we are being asked to do? I mean, I'm giving you kind of cheat sheet for the video here, but you can basically ask those questions in commentary. You know, and you will be starting to outline a kind of very strong critical analysis of your own position as a player just by asking those questions of the game that you are playing at that point in time. This whole thing is called procedural rhetoric. What does the word rhetoric mean? Can anyone give me a definition?
The art of persuasion.
Ding, ding, ding. Sponsored by Google.com. 100%, yes. Yeah, that is the textbook example of how you define rhetoric. The art of persuasion. Rhetoric is the, if you like, if you go back to Plato and the dialogue, the Gorgias, Plato describes rhetoric as a sort of empty form of communication where the purpose of it is to persuade you to do something, and that's it. There's nothing underpinning it at all. It's just a case of get people to do what you want them to do. So when Bogost talks about procedural rhetoric here, is conversational rules produce meaning, What he's saying is that the rhetorical content of video games comes through what we are asked to do. Games persuade you by making you do stuff. And it's through that doing stuff that you are persuaded of the position of the game itself, the people underpinning the game, who made it, why they made it, the commercial interests of the game. You are persuaded about those things through your playing of the game itself. So meaning comes from our interactions with the mechanics, not really from the visual, oral, and temporal aspects of it. Procedural rhetoric can then characterize ideas. I put DEF CON as a thing here. DEF CON is a free game you can play. It's actually quite old now, it'd be about 17 years old. Has anyone ever encountered it? Morgan, explain what you have to do.
I can't really remember much. I mean, I didn't play it long. It was quite hard. But
it's not easy, actually. But there's a reason for that.
I think it's all about. Isn't it all about like? Isn't it like a strategy game revolving around nukes?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
It's a very short strategy game that you can play online where you can be Russia or America. And the whole purpose of the game is to murder the other side with nuclear weapons. So you have to put your nuclear forces in particular positions and then basically kick off a thermonuclear war. Now the reason why it's difficult is nobody wins. You can't win a nuclear war, so like you can never win the game. In that, there's a procedural rhetoric. You are being asked to do something which is actually quite difficult. It's quite involved, and you're being asked to make morally compromised choices. I mean, you've got to aim your missiles at cities. And when you do that, it will say, this missile has got this much power, so it will kill this many people. And you've got to make these calculations about how many people you can kill as quickly as possible. There is a procedural rhetoric here about nuclear war. And then, of course, the end point is you can't win anyway. And it's telling you nuclear war is futile. And then it's like, when the game over screen comes up, it's like people and activity is represented by lights, and of course the whole world is black because there's no people or anything left. You've just destroyed the world. It's a very simple example of what I'm trying to get at here, but it's quite an effective one. And when DEF CON came out, this was like in the Bush era. Like, there was genuinely American politicians like, this game is ridiculous. This game does not represent the reality of nuclear war. And it's like, yeah, bitch, it does. You know, this is exactly it. The game BioShock is a great example of procedural rhetoric because it is an example of something called forced choice. This comes from Robert Jackson's book about BioShock, which he released in 2013. Games are complex procedural modelling systems that constitute a bundle, not of choices, but of forced choices. The illusion, even in something like Sims, of openness of choice is important. Because the game wouldn't work if we had actual open choices, because it's a finite programmed environment. You can always choose a certain number of ways to go. Something like Oregon Trail, it's a much more simple thing to map out because it's far more linear, perhaps, or Dead Space, for example. But even in something online like Overwatch, we're presented with choices, but it's between this and this. The choice is forced always by the logic of the game itself. BioShock, according to Jackson, embodies the worst of capitalist logic, offers the ambiguity of moral agency. What he means by that is, it makes us think we can choose. But at the same time, all the decisions have been made for us. There's a twist in the end of BioShock, which I won't ruin for anyone, but it will. If you get to the end, it basically tells you that all those decisions you thought you were making were completely fake because they were already made for you. It's a kind of neat meta-commentary on games itself and like contemporary society, and I think it was deliberate by the programmers, although the guy who ran the programming team is a complete dick, so it might not be. There's a kind of weirdness going on there. What Robert was trying to say in his analysis of this game is that all games, to a certain extent, present themselves to us like we have agency. But when we step away and analyse the whole path of the game, we've been directed towards one area. Everything was mapped out for us beforehand. Now, sadly, you might think, well, is that just exclusive to games? And say, no. You know all those module choices you've been doing? And all those choices you made about your education? You've all been heading towards the same thing. The unemployment office. Alright? You're all going the same place. You're all going on the rock and roll because there won't be any jobs. I'm only joking. But it's a series of false choices, right? Your chest goes, yeah, fucking wasted 3 years of my life on this dump. I mean, one resonant for Cheska. Cheska goes to the bar in the pub, right? She's there like, yeah, what am I going to have? It's all a series of false choices. You still end up steaming at the end of the night. You know, capitalism gives you a series of like endless choice, apparently, all related to the same outcome. We just choose different ways to get there. And that's really what Robert's talking about in his analysis of Bioshock. It presents the illusion that we have agency and choice in something. Dead Space is not a bad example of this, I don't think, where you're positioned in a way that you think, yeah, I'm making choices here, but you will always end up in the same place, no matter how, it didn't matter what choices you made. You know, every player ends up doing the same thing at the end of the day. So, this is almost a perfect example of procedural rhetoric. The game offers you this thing, but in the end of the day, you will always take the same argument out of it. Ooh. Go back. Games give freedom while bombarding you with rules. They offer us the idea of a free environment, but they are always piling rules onto us. And those rules are communicated through metaphors in the game. The narrative and the structure of the game and the metaphorical structure of what's going on serve to give us a set of rules. And if the rules structure things, you know, and the rules are, you know, structural in themselves, like colonialization is a structure and principle of video games, then the political content of colonialization as an ideological position is going to infest itself within the game. So, to go back to Ian's questions, when we ask, you know, virtual worlds or video game worlds, you know, what can we ask about these? They correspond to dominant ideologies, not only of elites, but specifically the epistemological elites of digital games. Elites, as we usually think of it in a kind of political economy sense, that doesn't apply in video games. Video games are an elite within an elite who develop them. Tech bros, mostly. People who have been through a particular education and particular technical training, they are the people who develop video games. Who are these people? Male, well-educated, wealthy, right of centre, capitalist, I should add another word, white. Almost overwhelmingly, the video game development world is white. This also is sadly a form of colonialism. In the 90s and early 2000s, video game development in Japan paced video game development in the West, and that has fallen off in a big way in the last 20 years. And that has had real issues with the sort of cultural identity of games, the sort of diversity of games being produced, kind of things that we're asked to do in games is less so, weirdly, now than it was in earlier console generations. And this lack of divergence from these issues causes difficulties. New technologies are often called ahistoric. You know, there's no historical precedent. Video games code all kinds of ideologies and behaviours which have been really problematic historically. If you look at something like Fortnite, there are millions and millions and millions of kids playing Fortnite every day. If you just look at the basic thing of what you're asked to do in any game of Fortnite, it is a classic, not just colonialist, you're parachuted onto an island and you've got to take it over. Okay. You don't have to be like, you know, the world's greatest detective to see that one. But also, far more fundamental in that is the idea of survival of the fittest. You know, that to win, you have to wipe out everything else around you in order to be the best. I mean, that's colonialist, but it's the area, colonialism is nothing but dark, but that's really dark. You know, the route to success is get rid of everything else, and then you are the top. One person wins. It's kind of the message of capitalism. You know, how do you win at life? You beat everyone else. Actually, you win at life by creating connections with other people and having a richness and diversity of experience. You know, like we are having right here now. We're winning right now in a big way. Culturally, and I've sort of talked about Gamergate and talked about it in the context of this. If you look at, I mean, I think this is one of the best ideas about Gamergate. Toxic technoculture of male dominance and misogyny carried through channels such as 4chan and Reddit, which is fundamentally based on the procedural rhetoric of what video games have positioned those people as understanding the world as. That is darkly problematic as far as I'm concerned. It reinforces the need to study games, right? So, what do we need to take away? What do you need to do from this? All games have meaning encoded into them. From the very simple, from something like Oregon Trail, actually Oregon Trail is really, really problematic in this because it's based on a historical event. It happened, and that was colonialist. So, you know, that is really problematic. But from the most simple to the most complex games, there are these ideological positions in them. Considering ideology is not textual, it's a matter of agency and performance, and always ask this question. You can fundamentally base any video game analysis on this if you want. What is the game asking me to do, and why? Don't just ask what it's asking you to do, but ask why is it asking me to do this thing? That will uncover the ideological context of the game for you. Fantastic. I will see you guys next week. Not Jordan, of course. I'll see Jordan in like an hour. But I'll brighten up my day, and I feel better. You better come with good stuff. Finish before 12.